Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to our Pokemon Natural History ANU panel. Thank you. So this panel is brought to you by Cosplay for Science. We are a group of scientists, educators, and cosplayers who love combining all three things to share the amazing stories of science that exist in pop culture and fandom and all those really cool things that we love. This panel is also brought to you by the Alf Museum of Paleontology. We are located in Claremont, about 40 minutes away. We're an amazing museum filled with fossils and all those cool natural history things from around the world. Today, I'm really excited to welcome an amazing group of scientists to share with you the many ways that our world has inspired the world of Pokemon. That was my best Professor O cosplay with a little bit of Thank you. You guys are making me feel real good this morning. So, to get started, let's introduce our panel of experts on here today. If everybody could introduce themselves, tell us what you do, and who your favorite Pokemon is. You want to start, Nancy?
Yeah, I can start, I guess. I've been nominated. I'm Nancy Chen. I am a geologist and science educator at Harvard-Westlake School, which is a high school in Los Angeles. My background is in geology, so I study rocks and what that tells us about Earth's history, the changes that it has undergone, to kind of let us know what's happening today. And my favorite Pokemon will probably be Eevee, just because of how many options that it has to evolve to different forms and what we can do to interact to kind of make it to be different.
Hello. Are we going to clap for her?
Oh,
Very impressive. Hello. My name is Jacob Hurst. I am the Resnick Plant Health Lecturer over at California State University, Fresno. And so I teach plant science class. Yeah. Woof, woof. I teach plant health classes. So I mean, as it turns out, a lot of stuff affects plant health. So soils, entomology, crop nutrition, all that sort of stuff. If it makes a plant sick, I probably know a little something about it. And so I teach over there, do a little bit of research. I also have background in like spider locomotion and like morphometrics. So I know a little bit about spiders too. And my favorite Pokemon, I was really torn. It's like choosing a favorite child, but I'm gonna go with I think Surskit. It's like the water strider Pokemon. It sort of looks like a curling stone with legs. And then, I don't know, it's something about it that I find adorable.
Oh my god, is that what it is?
Yeah, it's a water strider.
Is it a curling stone?
No,
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Sorry.
it's a portmanteau of like surface and skitter, and so it's Surskit.
I'm a scientist, I swear.
Hi, my name is Dr. Earyn McGee. I'm a herpetologist, so that's someone who studies reptiles and amphibians, and I specifically study lizards. I am also a science communicator, which means that I just talk to people about science. My medium tends to be social media. I created a game called #FindThatLizard, where it's kind of like Where's Waldo? So it's essentially I post a picture of the lizard, and it's camouflaged in its background, and people have to find it in the picture, like you have to find Waldo, essentially. And my favorite Pokemon, probably of like forever, is Vulpix. And yeah, I don't know why, but I was just drawn to Vulpix and Ninetales. So.
If you're not following Dr. McGee, you really should, because Find That Lizard is so much fun. And like, she's top tier SciComm on social media, so I'm just plugging that. Follow.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bayne Westrick-Snapp. I am, by training, I am a geochemist, but I am currently an educator at Cabrillo Marine Aquarium and the collections assistant. And yeah, so I'm work with a bunch of the animals. I work with the public, and my favorite Pokemon is Ampharos. No real reason, it's just been my favorite since Gen 2.
Yeah. Love it. I'm also gonna promote the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium because that was my favorite aquarium as a kid, and it's top tier too. So
it's really good.
it
It's free too.
So my name is Gabriel Philip Santos. I'm a paleontologist turned educator at the Raymond M. Alf Museum of Paleontology. I'm currently the director of education over there. I'm also the co-founder of the Cosplay for Science initiative, and I'm currently a National Geographic Grosvenor Teacher Fellow with Linda Expeditions. And I love to combine storytelling and sharing that with science and sharing as many cool things there are in our world with people. And that's what brought me here as part of Cosplay for Science and talking about the ways that science influences the world of Pokemon, and also the way that not many people realize being a Pokemon trainer is actually being a naturalist. And that's a really cool connection that I hope a lot of you leave today, that when you're out there playing your games, collecting your mons, even spinning your Pokestops if you play Pokemon Go, you're kind of being a naturalist. So starting with that, let's talk a little bit about Pokemon trainers as naturalists. You know, there's a lot that we do in the game that compares to the scientific method and collecting specimens and collecting data in our world for all of our scientists. How does that compare for you? Like, being a Pokemon trainer and being a naturalist and a scientist, how do you collect your specimens? How do you collect your data for your own natural world decks? There's a real word for it, I can't think right now.
Well, for me, instead of using a Pokeball, I use something that I call a lizard lasso. So for my research, I get to go out and I get to catch lizards. So essentially, I have this really long telescopic fishing pole, and then at the end of the fishing pole, there's a line, and at the end of the line, there's like a slip knot. And so essentially, I have to try to get the slip knot over the lizard's head and then pull up. And then I've caught the lizard, and I take different kinds of, data and whatnot, and when I'm done with it, I let it go. But, it's kind of like similar when you have like all these quests in the story for Pokemon, and like, Professor Oak or whoever, whichever, depending on whatever game that you're playing, like they're looking for some kind of data, and they're trying to, or like with the, last one I played was Pokemon Shield, and they're trying to figure out, okay, so what's causing, these anomalies in the environment? Like, why do we keep seeing these things happen? Go out and catch these Pokemon to see what's going on, and send the data back to me. Like, you're literally being a scientist in Pokemon. It's not like, there's no like simile or like, whatever, like it's not like being, like you are being a scientist in that game, because that's exactly what we do. We go out, we're saying, we make an observation, we're seeing that, oh, there's something going on in the environment, what is causing this, and then you start to think of hypotheses, and so like you're actually going through the full scientific method actually in Pokemon. You make an observation, you come up with the hypotheses, you don't necessarily do the experiments yourself, but you pull up the data, then the professors or whoever is going to be doing the actual experiment, and then you get to the climax of the game and you beat it. But hopefully you beat it. But it's pretty much almost one-to-one essentially. It's just, where's what kind of satisfaction are you getting from the data, and whether the actual application. Sometimes the application is just a fun thing for a game, and sometimes it's a fun thing in real life, because I like working with lizards and collecting data and doing that stuff. So yeah.
I think as a geologist, so partly I'm mostly a field scientist, where I go out in the world, kind of walk around, almost like what you do in Pokemon, kind of explore what is out there. So if you ever go in caves, you kind of have that handy like hammer, but I think your Pokemon does it for you. But in real life, we carry our hammers and we kind of beat up rocks to kind of collect samples to take it back into the lab. So one of the interesting stuff is that some of the rocks is what we use to kind of make objects, like in the game or in real life. Everything you're using right now is coming from our planet. But what I find really interesting, which is mostly where I'm coming from, is like I use rocks to kind of give us information about like how volcanoes explode. Like why is like Hawaii exploding the way it is versus the one that just exploded in Indonesia. And so that kind of ties in a little bit of how Pokemon is created as well, in terms of a lot of the fire type Pokemons, they live near volcanoes, and what does that actually do to the environment it is? I know Gabe kind of ties in a little bit with rocks, with like studying how his mammals in the past have died. So we kind of played a little bit of forensic scientists as well with the rocks that we have on our planet. What does that tell us about our environment?
So I'd say the biggest difference from, if you're an entomologist, most entomologists, comparing the way you collect specimens versus Pokemon is, well, like we end up killing our specimens. And so we need them to be preserved, and so we want them to, maybe not struggle around too much. There's a lot of things we have to take into account as we're actually trying to preserve them, and it does result in their death. Whereas in Pokemon, we're very much trying not to. We don't even want them to really faint, right, if we're trying to catch them. And so that's a big difference. On the plant side of things, it depends on what the end use is. If we're looking at like we're doing like maybe tissue testing to see, are your almonds nice and happy this year? We do want to collect the leaves and dry them down. But if it's like, we want to select a really cool new plant that we've seen out in the wild, we're very much concerned about keeping it alive. And so there's this sort of dichotomy because I work with living specimens, and depending on the samples and our purposes, they may need to stay alive or not be alive. There's some tension there.
Piggybacking on that, at the aquarium for our collections too, when we collect new animals, we do have our live ones on display, but there is also, we have a collection as well, so we try to get the ones that are already dead, but occasionally you do have to kill something for your collection, which the collection is in a way kind of like your Pokebank. Like we do surveys at the aquarium to look at biodiversity in various habitats that are affected by various levels of human interaction. And when we find something new that we haven't seen before, that becomes a voucher, and that is in a parallel. You can kind of compare that to your first time seeing like a Pikachu. You catch that and it goes to your box. That's your first data point for that Pokemon. Say it was the first time we found a kelpfish on that survey. That then goes to our Pokebank, and that becomes our data point for that, essentially.
And then to piggyback off of that a little bit, I forget what it's called, but for like museum collections, when you get that first one, it's the
holotype.
Yeah, the holotype. So you have that also in Pokemon. Once you catch it for the first time, then it's like, oh yeah, this is what it is, and it gives you all like the information about it. So like museum collections, they have holotype. So that's the first individual of whatever species or whatever collected, and that's what the museum bases the rest of whatever that group collection is, I guess.
Yeah. It's funny, when I play Pokemon, the first, species of that Pokemon I catch stays in my box forever as my holotype. And I never actually thought that was me doing that until just now, where I'm like, I keep my holotypes. Talk about specimen collection. Let's talk a little bit about the ethics really quick. In Pokemon, that's the culture. You go collect your Pokemon, but we keep them alive. There's a whole partnership in there. In the real world, when we're collecting data, it's not just us deciding to go out and get a lizard or find a fish. There's a bit of a process. There's permits and stuff that go into it. Like, how do we, as scientists, make it ethical and sustainable when we go collect data, so we can learn about the natural world without having to be invasive and destructive to what we do?
Well, for me, like Gabe said, that there's a full process. So essentially, there is this organization, and of course, because I'm trying to talk about it right now, the name is it's eluding me right now. But essentially, it's oh my gosh, I had to do it so many times in grad school, so I don't know why I can't think of it. But essentially, there's an organization that regulates what kind of research people are doing and how. So essentially you have to write up your whole entire project to them, including like your methods, and justify it. And then when you send it to them, they'll be like, okay, well, this is an established method for catching this particular animal, and you can do that. Or if you're trying to do something new, they might be like, not quite sure, because they're trying to make sure that, one, whatever you're doing, you're not disrupting like maybe a sensitive population. So if it's like an animal or a species that is like in danger, like there's a whole lot of extra regulations there, or it wants to make sure that you're not being unnecessarily like cruel to the animals during the collection period or release, making sure you're not holding on to them for too long. So for lizards in particular, I guess like most reptiles, it's a little bit more lax than for like large mammals or something like that. So like you definitely still have to like go in and do your research to see, okay, how am I going to collect this? So like lizard lassoing, so I coined the term lassoing because of like being a Black woman in a predominantly white field, having something be called noosing, which is the traditional term for that act, was really uncomfortable for me, and I was like, how can we make this more inclusive? So I coined the term lassoing, but with noosing, that had been used like for, you know, pretty much since like people have been catching lizards, and so like it was already established. And so for me, when I was doing my research, I was like, okay, well, I don't need to do anything more than lassoing. So that's already established. I'm going to tell them that's what I'm doing, and they're going to be like, okay, now if I wanted to do something different, say I wanted to do pitfall traps, which I actually did try to do at one point in time, that gets to that also. So with pitfall traps, essentially what you're doing is you're digging a hole in the ground and you're putting a bucket in the hole, and then you're gonna be putting up like a fence or something, and you're gonna be driving the animals towards your bucket in the ground. And so that gets a little bit more complicated because you're not just doing something with the animals themselves, you're also altering the environment. And so that was really tough, but it didn't work. But like, so there's a lot of steps that actually go into figuring out how you're gonna catch these animals. And then when I catch them, because I'm doing stuff on social media, I do like to like take pictures and videos and stuff like that, but I'm very quick with it. So when I take my undergraduate students out with me, I have like a whole protocol for what we're gonna do. So I'm like, we're gonna go out, we're gonna catch the lizard, we're gonna take the data, we're gonna take the data as quickly as possible. We may or may not take photos, but if we do, this is what we're gonna do to take the photos and videos, and then we're gonna let it go. Because even though lizards tend to be more of a hardy animal, you can catch them, you can handle them. The longer you have them in hand, the more you stress them out. It's always going to be a stressful situation for them, and so you want to be handling them or as little as possible. And so like even when I do like my social media stuff and science communication, I do encourage people. Like what I love about the work that I get to do is I get to be hands-on. Like that was what drew me to it. And so I don't want to tell other people not to be hands-on, but I do make sure to let people know, like, you are going to be stressing out these lizards, and you should check like your local laws. So like for most lizards, if you want to catch them, that's fine, no one's gonna bother you, but you should like look at like your local fish and wildlife department, and that'll tell you if you need to like buy like a hunting permit or something like that. So essentially it's just you have a little piece of paper that says, yes, I'm allowed to go out and catch lizards, and it will explicitly tell you which species you can catch, which species you can't catch, and what it means to disturb a species, because disturbing them isn't only catching them. Like you don't want to like chase a lizard for no reason, because it takes a lot of energy for it to run away from you and try to hide and try to duck and dodge you, and that's energy that it could be using for something like running away from an actual predator, something that actually is going to eat it or something like that, or like trying to find food or find a mate or something like that. For us, you just get up and you do stuff, and it's just, you know, something like, you know, like when you have high or low energy levels, it's the same for a lizard. Like sometimes they have high energy, sometimes they have low energy, sometimes they don't want to do nothing, and then here you come. Here you come. Oh, it's a lizard. Like, sometimes you have to know when to leave stuff alone, when to not touch. You don't need to touch everything, but it's okay to touch some things.
I've never felt more relatable to a lizard. So thank you so much for that great explanation, Erin. That leads into a really great segue to the next part of our panel is, you know, the natural world inspires so much of the world of Pokemon that, you know, in so many ways that it's just cool to see how the creators and, you know, creatures owners of Pokemon have taken real life behaviors and adaptations and turned them into something that seems fantasy but is actually, you know, really grounded in science. So we're gonna go into Pokemonology now, and we're going to see the many ways that the natural world has been, or the Pokemon world is inspired by our world. And one of the first things I actually want to talk about is from the new region of Paldea. There's a new lizard Pokemon called Cyclizar, and it actually has a cool signature move called Shed Tail. And there are some people who don't realize that actually some lizards can shed their tail, Erin. Can you want to explain that a little bit more for us, please?
Sure. So, essentially what this is called autonomy. So essentially you have a lizard and it has a tail, and some lizards can drop their tail. So if you think of like Lego bricks, you stack a bunch of Legos together, and at each for when you get to each Lego, so each Lego is like a vertebrae in the lizard's tail. So that each vertebrae, it can actually break the tail. And then it'll drop it, and then the tail will keep moving. And so this is, we think it's to like distract predators from actually being able to catch the lizard, because they're distracted by the moving tail, and then the lizard can actually get away. And what's the booth number again?
549.
If you come to Cosplays for Science booth 549, I have an actual broken lizard tail from the southern alligator lizard. It's a lizard that you can really common here in Southern California, easily found, and you can actually see the vertebrae where the tail like broke off and stuff like that.
Do you carry this everywhere?
I'm in focus.
That's great. Again, in the game, the shed tail move helps distract the opposing Pokemon so that it attacks the tail instead of it, so it doesn't lose its HP. So there's a really cool story and example of how the real world created this cool mechanic in the game, and we don't, for a lot of folks, it's just this cool mechanic, but it's actually this amazing scientific adaptation that lizards have. And here's another one that I like, that we should discuss. This is Nincada. Yeah, Nincada, and it evolves into Ninjask, but when it does, there's another Pokemon that appears if you have an empty Pokeball called Shedinja, and it's a cool story that I think Jake wants to talk about.
Yeah, so this is based off of the life cycle of the periodical cicada. So if you look in the Pokedex, they talk about how, it spends most of its time as Nincada, and then after like 10 years, it turns into a Ninjask. And it's like, oh, and then this other Pokemon appears as a result. And it's, well, actually, that Pokemon's been there the whole time. Shedinja is just like the old Moleskin, so of the Nincada before it turns into the Ninjask. And insects, unlike us, they have a hard exoskeleton, right? So our bones are inside our body. For insects, they need to have support from outside their body because they don't have a skeleton inside. And so it's a very effective kind of protection from the elements. It allows them to move around and withstand, they can fall from great heights relative to their size and survive. But it doesn't make it easy to grow larger. So when you do grow larger as an insect, you have to molt. And so you split your skin open, you crawl out, you have a new skin underneath. While it's still soft, you kind of pump your fluids around to expand it, and then it hardens, and you have your new hard exoskeleton. For cicadas, I don't know if anyone around here has seen them, but they're very common as you go further east, and there are some that will come out in huge broods, almost like plague-like proportions every 13 to 17 years. And they leave behind these old moleskins, and they're so robust because they have a lot of chitin, right? It's this polysaccharide that gets all cross-linked. It's a structural, component of their shells, and so they stay behind, kind of frozen in place, and a lot of people freak out and think it's actually alive. And so I think that's what inspired this. Because actually, if you look like the sprite of Shedinja, if you look at it from behind, like during a battle, you can see it's actually empty inside. And
it's part ghost, too.
It also has a ghost type. So it's like, they were like, well, this sticks around, what if it was still alive? I think is the inspiration here. And so it has this sort of, spirit in there, and that Wonder Guard ability, I think, is a testament to how tough that exoskeleton is.
That's awesome. I really love the amazing stories that we can share about our natural world. This one here, this is a legendary Pokemon, Groudon, and it's known as the creator of the land. But for us geologists and paleontologists, Groudon is kind of special to us. Right, Nancy?
So Groudon, creator of the land, so it's actually mimicking a lot of Earth processes, such as plate tectonics. So we kind of live near one, Sandra's fault. He's not mimicking Sandra's fault by any means, but there is one in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So one of his special powers is that he's able to create land, and part of it is that magma's coming up and hardening. So the Atlantic Ocean's actually getting bigger based off of some of the powers that he is showcasing in the game. And one of the things is that he stayed dormant. You have a lot of eruption, and so essentially the size of Hawaii is actually getting bigger with each eruption because of the magma that's coming up. So if you kind of play him, the primal form, is that?
Yeah, primal reversion.
He is able to create land just from the powers that he has, and that's similar to what we see on our planet. And I think it's very fascinating because we know that
there's not really a living species kind of creating the land, but Pokemon kind of dives into that. And before science and technology became more common, a lot of oral legends have been created to explain some of the scientific processes. Like in Hawaii, we have Pele, which is the goddess of fire. In ancient Greece, they thought volcanoes had gods. When it was exploding, the gods were angry. So it's kind of tied into like how we try to explain science through time, and that's what kind of Pokemon ties in as well, the oral history, and then kind of tying in what we actually see on our planet.
Cool. Sorry, I got distracted. The internet kept trying to connect. I don't pay. Okay, so another cool story in Pokemon that I really love as a paleontologist is a story about Relicanth, and this goes into the deep oceans of Hoenn. Bayne, do you want to kind of share that story?
Yes, I think this Pokemon is also extremely cool. It's so most modern day fish are ray-finned fish. This guy is an example of a lobe-finned fish. This is a more ancient version of the way fish are made. Their fins are a lot more meaty. They're not as like spindly as like you can see in a normal fish. So like any fish Pokemon, like a Goldeen, it's got very flimsy little fins. This guy has more beefy fins, but this also around the time of Hoenn, I was a little kid, but I remember hearing about coelacanths being discovered super deep in the ocean, and then they got this guy into the games, and he's also found in very specific, very deep locations in the game. I just thought that was super cool. And the Pokédex entry is very interesting for him. It states that it hasn't changed in millions of years because it is the perfect life form.
I love that so much. You know, for me as a paleontologist, the thing about Relicanth is you have to go deep into the ocean to find it, and that's how we hypothesize Relicanth lived for so long without being discovered by humans. It was found in the deep ocean. It was only brought up because some fisherman was fishing off the coast and just happened to catch it. And again, that's not just an adaptation or something. That's a real-life scientific discovery translated for the world of Pokemon. So if you're playing Pokemon, again, take a second to look at those Pokédex entries, the way that Pokemon...
Say fight.
That's true.
Lizards will
On
fight.
their own, on their own.
Yeah.
On their own. I can't even get my corgi to get out of bed. So. You know, here's another cool thing in the world of Pokemon. Pokemon evolve. They change as we battle with them as our partners, and they change forms and get more powerful. But this is kind of where our world and the Pokemon world kind of diverge and can confuse some of people, rightfully so, because, you know, there's not a lot of explanation of it in that game world. And this is the concept of evolution. Now, in our world, we can talk about evolution as change through time. You know, there's the very classic image of the ancient primate evolving into modern humans, Darwin's tree, and phylogenetics. And so for all of us on here, you know, we can talk about a little bit about the way that Pokemon evolve. I think one of my favorite ways to talk about this is just speciation in general. For our panelists and scientists, can you explain a little bit of what speciation kind of is?
So essentially with speciation, let's see, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this. So you have your genus and your species, right? And so the genus is essentially like, think about it kind of like your nuclear family, all right? You have your mom, you have your dad, and then you have your siblings. And so you could think of you and your siblings as different species. So like you would think that like with your parents creating like, you know, some children, it would just you will all be the same species, but no, you come under different kinds of circumstances growing up, which makes you very different people. And so that's kind of like the same thing with species. So you kind of start off with maybe like one population, and then somehow members of that population get isolated, and because of that isolation, they start to get different kinds of characteristics slightly. And so you're not very different from one another, but you're different enough that when we look at your DNA, we're like, oh, that's different than that thing. So, but they're similar, but they're also very different. And that's kind of how speciation works.
And in the world of Pokemon, you know, we've been introduced to regional variants, right? So the same quote species of Pokemon have adapted and changed in different regions of the world. You know, here's a great example. We have Meowth, Galarian Meowth, and Alolan Meowth, right? Their types have changed, their morphology has changed, the way they look. But the thing is they're all still considered a Meowth, the same species. So in the Pokemon world, I guess speciation has a different terminology, but in our world, when do we consider something a new species?
It has to have a certain amount of genetic difference. So essentially, like because you can have like subspecies, and I'm not sure about how much genetic difference they actually have to have, but it needs to be different enough where they're just like, okay, so like and it gets into a lot more complicated things of like what is a species, but essentially the easiest way to say it is they have a certain amount of genetic difference that they're like, okay, these things are now so far removed apart from these other things that we are no longer going to consider them the same species.
And then, like, you know, in our world, we have the different kingdoms and the different phylums, right? Plants and animals. But the Pokemon world blows those lines quite a bit, and that's fun. But like Jacob, for us, do plants follow the same type of rules to evolution? Do we define species quite similar in plants too?
Yeah, generally yes. So when we're talking about different species of plants, and if we have, you know, closely related species living together, a lot of times what we think about as separate species, it can be based on morphology, for example. So maybe a lot of times we look at the flower morphology or the way the seeds appear, various characteristics like that. But we might also think about, like, can these species successfully interbreed? And if so, then is it really are they separate species? And so a lot of times we're looking for, they are visually distinct, and they have some barriers to actually reproducing successfully. Because sometimes you can have stuff crossed, but then like the resulting offspring are sterile. So the classic example in domestic animals, like a mule being produced from like a horse and a donkey. And so like they look similar, right? And they can interbreed, but the offspring is not viable. And so that, puts them pretty clearly as a separate species. So this happens in plants. Interestingly, in plants, though, if we get something that's like sterile, that like can't reproduce, we can take it and culture it and actually propagate it through like cuttings or grafting or something like that, and then preserve this unique kind of like really cool like love child between two species that normally wouldn't be able to breed successfully.
We don't have dittos in our world, unfortunately.
Can I piggyback off of that? So I was thinking about the whole breeding thing, and then that gets into the definitions of the species or whatever. But one of my favorite lizard facts. Okay, so like you can have these two species of lizards. So like there's like these this group of lizards called the whiptail lizards, and you find them mostly in the southwestern United States. So for some of them, so you can have species A, the species B, they come together and they mate, and their offspring are not sterile. As a matter of fact, their offspring creates a whole new species, and in this new species, the females, they're only females, and they clone themselves. And it's just one of my favorite things, is because and they can continue to reproduce like that, and they have their whole own population. So there are populations of lizards out there that are just all females, and they clone themselves. So yeah, that's.
So it's the real life duping hack from Pokemon.
Rocks are not this complicated.
When we're talking about evolution, right, there's a lot of external factors that influence change through time, and even in Pokemon, they've kind of explained that. One of my favorite more recent examples is Galarian Corsola, right? These are coral Pokemon that in the Galar region, as climate changed, their seas disappeared, they turned into this ghost type. But this mirrors our real world in a very, very cool way. And Bayne, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Galarian Corsola and then later Cursola, those are bleached corals, which I'm sure you guys have heard of coral bleaching in real life. It's a result of warming sea temperatures, and when sea temperature does rise, there are microorganisms within coral called zooxanthellae, and those are what give its color. Those are photosynthetic organisms, and in warmer waters, they get chased out of the coral's structure, and that ends up bleaching the coral, which resulted in us getting this cool little sad Galarian Corsola.
Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
And then like in real life, whenever it becomes bleach, it actually becomes very, very weak. And so if you ever go like snorkeling or like scuba diving, they try to encourage you to not touch the coral because we don't want to cause more damage to the living rock, which is the closest thing to the living thing in rock form. That's possible.
You know, this is one of those things where like this is a real problem in our world, and it's a story that was brought over to the world of Pokemon that again can influence and inspire you to think more about the world as a naturalist. You know, this is a cool thing in the world of Pokemon, but for us it's a very serious issue with climate change and losing our coral reefs because they are very, very important to our ocean's ecosystem. So moving on a little bit to change the subject from something kind of bleak. There's another cool thing that's recently introduced in the region of Paldea, and that's convergent forms. So in our world, there's this thing called convergent evolution, where two unrelated groups of animals or organisms evolve to be very similar because they live in very similar environments. So one of my new favorites in the Paldea region is Wiglet, just because it's so cute. But there's also Diglett, right? So this is the ground-type mole Pokemon and the garden eel Pokemon, and they've evolved to be similar because they both burrow and have that very similar features. In our world, we have tons of examples of convergent evolution. Does anyone have any examples they want to share that they know of convergent evolution?
Well, I mean, if we want to look really broadly, like birds and bats, right? They both evolved to be able to fly around, and so as a result, they have sort of reductions in like their bone structure. They have modifications that allow them to actually generate lift and fly, but they're not closely related. Back in the very old days, Aristotle was like, oh yeah, these are definitely similar. They're probably the same. We'll group them together because they both fly. But nowadays, we're very much aware that there are some clear differences, and they just evolved similarly.
And we have sharks and whales as well. We have fish as sharks, mammals as the whale. Very similar body structures. They both have fins. They both swim in a very similar way.
What I find interesting is that geologists kind of use living organisms and how they kind of evolve through time to kind of give a sense of how our continents used to be. So have you ever heard about like Pangea, where all our continents used to be one land? One of the evidence to kind of determine that it used to be one land is because of fossils that we found and how similar they are. So we have similar fossils in South America that we can also found in Africa, and they clearly don't swim. So it's like, how did they even get into two different continents? So we can kind of use this data to kind of interpret other mechanisms on our planet.
Yeah, and I think you can infer stuff about the environment from the forms that you see. So if you see animals that are, right, the thing that's going around on the internet now is like, oh, everything turns into a crab. It's because there's basically selection pressure to have that body shape because it may be the most, efficient. And so if there are many environments where that is an efficient body shape, it's not going to be a surprise to find a lot of animals that are crabs, basically.
Yeah, that's awesome. Talking about, evolution, in the world of Pokemon, some Pokemon can evolve when exposed to certain, stones and things like the Mega Stone, Leaf Stones. For a geologist, does that happen in our world? Do stones give off energy?
If anyone's bubbles, it does not. I hope I did not break anyone's dreams about stones having
It's radioactive.
some powers. Exactly, but there are some rocks where it is radioactive, where it's emitting some sort of energy. There are some. We can also use this kind of concept if any asteroids or meteorites hit our planet, because it actually does change the chemistry of the soil or the rocks we have on here. And we can kind of use that to determine, oh, there was an asteroid that hit here like millions of years ago. We kind of determined that with the asteroid that was part of the reason why dinosaurs became extinct. We kind of use that now to kind of study rocks in other planets, like what we kind of use for Mars. So there's different ways that energy is emitted from rocks that we can use that to kind of determine what is going on.
And then on the other side of extinction, or evolution, there's extinction. This is when organisms disappear from the face of our planet. As a paleontologist, we see extinction happen, but in the world of Pokemon, they've actually introduced how some species of Pokemon went extinct due to human interactions, especially in the Hisui region in Pokemon Arceus Legends. Yes. Wait.
Legends Arceus.
Legends Arceus. It's only It's only at 11:30. So yeah, there are these Pokemon, these regional form evolutions that have disappeared because in Sinnoh, because the Pokemon don't have their ways of evolving have disappeared. And in our world, we face a real serious issue this day with potentially the 6th major mass extinction. And in all of your research, is this something that you think about or that we should really be more concerned about?
Yes. So it's a very simple answer, but the really fun thing about my research is that I got to go out and look to see what it was that lizards were eating, and so this probably seems like a really simple question, and if I were to ask it to you guys, you'd probably say like bugs or insects or something like that, but then I would follow up and be like, so where are those insects coming from? And then that's getting into the deeper part of the question. So you're looking at terrestrial insects and also aquatic insects. And so with aquatic insects, so I get into entomology a bit here. Thank you. And so with aquatic insects, they spend part of their life cycle in water, but if we're seeing drought and stream drying due to climate change, then we no longer have those streams, the insects can't spend their larval stage in the water, then we no longer have those insects, because like once they're done with the larval stage, they emerge into the terrestrial system, so onto like the land, and like they end up being like the flies that you swat around and stuff like that. But then they're also potentially food sources for animals like lizards. So what I got to do is I went out and I looked at, I collected both insect samples, and then I collected some samples from lizards, and I was like, okay, are these lizards eating these insects, with the idea of being able to provide research to resource managers to be like, yeah, these lizards are eating these insects, and so we do want to do things that preserve these different waterways, so that way we can keep these species around. And the thing with lizards, I picked lizards because I just got stuck with them in undergrad. They were a lot of fun, and then when I went to grad school, I just stuck with lizards. But they're important parts of the ecosystem because they act as predators and prey. So pretty much everything eats them. My undergraduate advisor used to call them ecological popcorn because everybody would do. That's essentially how it would go. So anything that you can think of, from other lizards, snakes, small mammals, large mammals, birds, bats, everything is eating these lizards, and it can just kind of, and so not only does it have direct effects into the environment, but we can like kind of be like, okay, so if this is what is happening to the lizards because we're like losing this water source, then we can infer from that, and then of course there's gonna have to be more research done, but we can infer from that other organisms within these ecosystems are also going to be impacted by this water loss. So there's a lot that you can go into looking at climate change, and is that as like there are things that we can do to try to mitigate it, and we should try our best to do those things because they are going to have impacts moving forward on not just us, but the animals and the plants and the ecosystems and everything around us that makes the earth habitable.
I also like to remind everyone, we're also considered a species. So like when we do kind of make these changes, it does impact us as well. So I teach a class called Natural Disasters. My students actually come out of it like, this is a very morbid class. I'm very sorry. But like we do see like an increase of hurricanes, an increase of wildfires in LA. We see an increase of all of these natural hazards. So at what point is it going to become severe where we're not just seeing the changes to the like smaller species? How is that going to affect the like macro species? Is that what you call them? Like the bigger things, which we are part of. So kind of thinking about how our actions kind of impact everything on our planet and what we should do now, because we have a power to kind of cause it to like slow down or to kind of fix a bit of it, not a little bit, hopefully like a lot of it, but yeah.
And in the ocean realms, right, Bayne, we're overfishing and causing so much destruction.
Yeah, so you see like farms for specific endangered species and stuff like that. Yeah, overfishing, there's tons of bycatch. And yeah, absolutely, we're affecting the ocean in a very heavy way. And there's a lot of litigation in that, trying to fix fisheries and stuff like that. The ocean is kind of the lifeline of the earth. If we choke that up, that's where 70% of the oxygen in the planet comes from. If that gets choked off, it's going to be pretty bad for us, the macro species.
Yeah, so sorry, we didn't want to be more, but again, these are like these lessons that we can learn from Pokemon. And unfortunately, we're running a little bit out of time, so I'm going to have to skip fossils. But you can learn more about these fossils down at our pop-up museum in booth 549, and we have fossils, and we'll be down there with our cool specimens that Earyn brought, and also Jake brought, and our fossils are down there. So please come visit us and learn more about it. Ask us all your questions. But there's one more thing I want to ask. Like, we were talking about these connections. So do you think playing Pokemon can make better naturalists and future scientists?
Yeah. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was go outside and touch animals, and that's what I got to do, and people paid me to do it, so. Okay, it was a one-on-one with Pokemon there. I got to go out and catch stuff, and then I got to go out and catch stuff, so.
Exactly, yeah, I think Pokemon and like Animal Crossing, everything where you're actually interacting with some sort of natural space, one, I think that self-selects, like people that are interested in that already are probably drawn to it, and it's like, okay, well maybe those people should be ushered towards like a STEM sort of pathway. But it also can, I think, inspire appreciation for the natural world in just like casual players and things like that too. And just really, it's great to have scientists that are trained, but it's more important, I think, actually to have a public that is literate in science. And so these games do contribute to that.
Yeah. I first started playing Pokemon, the goal was just to win, like beat all the badges, and then like that was it. But like as I got older, it became more fun to just explore, to walk around, see what type of Pokemons are there. And if you like start playing, I think that with Pokemon you can start asking questions like, oh, I'm trying to look for this one Pokemon. Sure, the Pokédex can tell you, but then kind of thinking about what type they are. Are you going to find them more by the ocean or the rivers? It kind of mimics like how we find these species in our life. And I think one of the things with like games like Pokemon is that it kind of encourages, it gets you to ask the question, it kind of gets you thinking on how things kind of work. Where did these ideas come from? And part of being able to like have fun with it is just playing the game.
I don't really have anything to add to that. As a kid growing up, I was outside catching lizards and bugs during the day, and at night I was catching the lizard and bug Pokemon, and then looking up, if I thought a Pokemon was cool, looking up the real life inspiration on it, and I think that's all of it.
Yeah.
I want to add to that.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I tried to get as many fossil Pokemon as I could, and I'm a paleontologist now, and so that led to definitely asking the questions. So I hope all of you were able to learn a lot about how natural history and Pokemon connect, and I hope all of you want to go out and be better naturalists and Pokemon trainers in the real world. So I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us on our panel. Big round of applause for our panelists. Please check out Cosplay for Science. Oh, actually, no. We have time for one question. Okay, you were fastest.
Okay, so thank you so much. I identify as Indigenous and Pascoyaqui, and when you were talking about the loss of waterways, it reminded me of, I dug into the history of the Yaquibacue, or the Yaqui River in Sonora and Tucson. And
I went to the University of Arizona. I lived in Tucson for 5 years.
Okay, awesome, yes. I was really connecting to what you were saying about how they diverted the waterway, and what I learned is that there used to be animals that lived in Tucson and Sonora that don't live there anymore, like crocodiles lived in that desert. And so I was interested, like, what do you think? I'm interested because I'm also going into my PhD program in Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies, and I want to make that connection between how does that affect the culture and the people, and what kind of animals were probably lost through that diversion of the waterway and all of the plants that were lost. And yeah, just any ideas on what could have been lost, because I've been more humanities and social sciences, so this really fascinates me.
Well, I think you already know more than me, because I didn't know that there used to be crocodiles there. But so now I'm gonna have to go in the deep dive. But essentially, I guess so. Whatever you're already doing, but there are also some efforts to like reintroduce native species. So like my advisor at the University of Arizona, he's still there. He's an aquatic entomologist. His name is Dr. Michael Bogan, but he has been working really closely with the city of Tucson, the state of Arizona as a whole, essentially to reintroduce the Gila top minnow back into the Santa Cruz River, and they've actually been very successful in doing that. And so the Santa Cruz is a very interesting river because a lot of it is paved, and so it comes down from the Colorado River, and then it goes into Mexico, and then it comes back up, but the flow is actually like reversed, so it flows from Mexico up. And the interesting thing about like the Tucson portion is that it's, like you said, has been diverted, and it's also paved, and so what they do in order to make sure that there's always water in the river is that they use effluent, so that's essentially treated wastewater, so the stuff that's coming down from like your toilets and your sinks and stuff like that, they treat it to make it usable for these animals, and so they are very particular with the timing of the release, and so they release it in a way so that there's always water, and so they're putting this fish back into that area, and like he's doing, and something that I would suggest checking out is like the Heritage Project, and then maybe getting in touch with some of like the local nonprofits, like the
Erin, I'm sorry that we have to close up.
All right,
But
sorry, but yeah,
come find us at the booth. We'll be outside. I'm happy to answer questions, and please follow us online. Thank you everybody so much for coming.